Beautiful morning today, wasn't it? Fall has always been my favorite time of the year because I like the cool morning. It's not cold enough to make my joints hurt, but it's cool enough to make me feel good. And this morning when I went outside, 66 degrees in the third week of July. It's like, thank you. I didn't deserve it, but I'm going to enjoy it. So anyway, beautiful day, beautiful day. As we continue our conversation about becoming a disciple or an apprentice of Jesus, we have talked about the fact that there's a difference between what a lot of people think about being a Christian and truly being a disciple. And it's important for us as we think about this difference. Jesus asked us to become disciples, okay? Now, when a rabbi or a master came to somebody and offered the extension and said, I would like for you to come and be my disciple. You'll be allowed to come and be my disciple. That was a great honor, all right? And one of the things that I hadn't thought about until I understood this a little better, a rabbi would never extend an invitation to become a disciple to somebody that was going to turn them down. Can you imagine how embarrassing that would be? To say, come be my disciple, and the guy says, nah, I'd rather go fish. Right? I don't want to do that. And in fact, I couldn't help as I was thinking about that. Most of you know we have several recently retired teachers in our church family. And it occurred to me almost hilariously, I wonder how many of them would still be teaching if they had the chance to go select the students they wanted to teach instead of having to take. I'm just saying, right? So this idea of it was a great honor to be asked to become a disciple. Now, we in the modern Western church don't look at becoming a disciple of Christ in that way. We don't consider it an honor, we consider it an option. Do you want fries with that, right? I mean, we add it on instead of understanding how that is. But Jesus extends that offer to become a disciple to each and every one of us. Okay? Not just a select few. He extends that offer to all of us. So as we begin to think about this idea of discipleship or apprenticeship to Jesus, I've shared, and we're going to be talking about in the coming week, three-step process to becoming a disciple or an apprentice. One is you have to be with the master, all right? So you have to be with Jesus, you have to become like Jesus, and then you have to be ready to do what Jesus did. Those are the steps to becoming an apprentice. So we have to be with him in order to learn from him. And so in the modern world today, if I want to learn how to do something, for example, I'm not sure, but I think the ignition switch in my pickup's going out, so I need to get on YouTube and find a video that'll tell me what it takes to get that steering column apart so I can change that, right? Either that or I'm going to take it to Chris and just say, call me in a week or so when you get it back. But we're used to doing things the fast way, the quick way. So YouTube, okay, Cliff Notes, quick and dirty, what have I got to do to get past this thing? But in becoming an apprentice, in becoming a disciple, there's no shortcut. All right? I can't watch somebody else do it and learn how. I have to be with the master. I have to be there. That was true in machining years ago. That's true if you want to learn a trade, like Mike can talk to us about what it takes to become a master electrician. You have to be with the master. You can't just read a book or watch a video or whatever and be able to do that. All right? So, if I have to be with the Master in order to become like the Master, by default that says I have to have some level of commitment to that. All right? It was not okay for an apprentice to say, well, I'll be there 2 days a week. Right? It means you go when the Master needs you to go. So we have to have some kind of commitment on our part if we're really going to do that. All right? So, I'm not sure. Oh, yes, I am. So, this idea of being with Jesus. So, it was easy. I challenged you some weeks ago as we began this series to think about what it had been like to be in that boat, out fishing, tired, didn't catch anything. Here this guy comes walking by and says, hey, come with me. All right, and they get out of the boat, they go off and leave their dad, they leave their possession, and they start walking with Jesus. So it was a great honor for them. They knew who Jesus was. All of them did. Perhaps they had heard him teaching, okay? But it was a great honor to be offered that opportunity. And I gotta believe that their dad was probably very proud that they went off and did that. All right? Now, they then began an apprenticeship, a discipleship, that lasted somewhere around 3 years. You know, it's not real clear, at least to me. We know from his baptism to the cross was about 3 years. We don't know where along the journey he actually invited the disciples to come with him. You know, it may have been next week. It may have been a little later on. So 3 years is about what... So they began to follow Jesus. They began to walk around with him. I've had mental pictures of after a day of preaching, like when he fed the 5,000, right? And the little kid brought the fish. And so can you imagine what it would have been like that evening to sit down with Jesus in an upper room someplace and just laugh and joke and talk about how it went and, you know, picking up the baskets full of empty food and just having fellowship, just having fun and enjoying yourself. And in the process, Jesus then would talk to them about what the lesson meant. Here's what I said. Here's what it means. Here's how you do that. Here's how you change in a way that can live out that kind of life. Now, one of the things, and Sue, when she was checking my notes here, she really thought this was interesting. Part of the idea that he was trying to get across, not only to his disciples, but to us, to become a disciple of Jesus is not about getting you into heaven. It isn't. It's getting heaven into you. It's the other way around, right? And that was so much different than any other rabbi was teaching at the time, and some preachers, okay? So it's about getting heaven into us. It's about having us think about things in a different sort of way and acting accordingly, okay? So what we need to do then, if that's true, and it's easy for us to say, well, yeah, if I was a disciple, that was easy because they could stay with him and walk with him and so on. Here we are 2,000 years later, and I don't have that chance, right? I'd get up out of my desk and follow him if he shows up, but I don't think, all right? But if we have that kind of an idea that we have lost the opportunity to be with Jesus because of the crucifixion and his ascension, we're kind of missing the point here, because in what he did for us, all right, and his crucifixion and his rising to be in heaven, It's not only his death, his sacrifice for us that we need to pay attention to, but now then, something the disciples didn't have is the power of his resurrection. Right? To begin with, all they had was this teacher, this rabbi, this friend, this guy to follow around and become. Now then that he has ascended, we have the power of the resurrection. They didn't have that, but we do, right? They got it eventually, and I thought that's what I was going to spend most of the morning talking about until God corrected me as I was working on this week, and that's fine. But think about the power of the resurrection. Do we tap that power? He said, I'm going to send you help, all right? The other thing that is interesting to me about the disciples, and particularly during the time that they were with him, but they continued it on later, and somehow or other we've let this get away from us as well, I think. He never sent disciples alone. There was always at least two, okay? And I think there's a very subtle lesson in that for us. So if I ask you, do you have somebody to help you on the journey? Rhetorical question, obviously, right? I don't want a show of hands necessarily, but think about that. If you don't, if there isn't somebody, maybe we need to think about that a little more. Maybe we need to do some development a little more. Maybe we need to look at that in a different sort of way, okay? Now, because we're no longer fishermen in a boat where Jesus can come by, we need to develop a practice of being with Jesus. Now, it's interesting because each of us, in the modern times, it's not likely Jesus is going to come by and engrave us an invitation and say, would you like to follow me? Okay? However, he does make the invitation to us, I believe. Now, oftentimes in the modern, and I'll share some examples of that as I go out of my own life, oftentimes what will happen to us in the modern time is we'll go through a desert experience with God's intent to get our attention. Say, hey, Larry, are you tired of trying that on your own? Would you like to have some help getting you through this? Would you like to understand why this is going on? And he does that so that we can remember it's a relationship with him that we need. Now, for me, I've had several of those. Sometimes I share them with you, and I'm not meaning to build myself up when I share things like that with you. Quite the opposite. I share things with you because I know I have permission. I'm not going to share things I know about you until you tell me it's okay to, right? And I haven't asked any of you about this kind of a situation, but part of what I think happens during these desert experiences, and I see them all throughout the Old Testament, you know, the prophets running away from people, and God would send an angel and a crow to feed him, and you walk for 40 days, you get to a cave, and what does he say? What are you doing here? I got work for you. Have something to eat and go back, right? Desert experiences are all over. And one that I would like to share with you in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11 through 13. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call on me and will come and pray to me, and I will hear you, and you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Okay? Seek me with all your heart. That's kind of an important part of that, by the way, at the very end of the verse. Now, I didn't just pull this out of context necessarily. Jeremiah chapter 29 is a letter that was written to the exiles. They had gone their own way, they'd done their own thing, they screwed up, And God said, okay, I'll let you go live in Persia for a while and see how that works out for you. And this is part of the letter that he wrote to them, and he said, in 70 years, I'm going to help you. All right, 70 years, I'm going to help you. But it's just as true for us today, okay? Sometimes we get carried off into exile. The difference is King Nebuchadnezzar carried them into exile. In our cases, we just walk there voluntarily most of the time, don't we? I mean, we make a bad choice and we just kind of slither off that direction. But God is seeking the lost, and he'll seek you in that time when the time is right, and he knows better than we do. Now, it took, in this case, 70 years for Israel, for the nation, to get their heart right. All right? When their heart was right, then God called them back and said, okay, let's start this over. Let's try again. Now, 70 years. Moses followed sheep around in the desert for 40 years to get his heart right. Right? 40 years. The disciples had about 3 years to get their heart right. And it wasn't until their heart was right that he could go to the cross, because they were ready. You see how that works? And so part of that depends on us. When do we get our heart right? And if we really want to be in with Jesus, a disciple, an apprentice, first thing we got to do is get our heart right. Okay? I've told you before, I don't want him striking me dead in the street to get my attention. Right? So I try to stay closer to him. I try to listen to him more. But when we have those desert experiences, most often it's for one of two reasons, or at least it has been for me. I've been in a few of these myself, and that's okay. I'll tell you about them someday if you want to bring me some coffee. But desert experiences can get our attention about bad choices that we've made. All right? It can also be times on the journey when there's an important lesson we need to learn. Okay? When there's an important lesson. So when you find yourself in one of these desert experiences, what I have learned to do, instead of saying, oh, get me out of here, okay, it's like, which one is it? Why am I here? What's the purpose? And so if I'm in this desert journey, because in my case, God will give them to me for a couple different reasons. Either there's somebody watching and wants to see how a mature Christian handles the situation, or I'm there to learn something. He's got a lesson for me. So I just ask him, which one is it? Okay? And he tells me, and then it's like, okay, now what do you want me to do next? Right? But this learning a lesson, several years ago, I was out of work and needing work and mostly money. I needed the money worse than the work, but, you know, we all have that problem, right? So anyway, this couple came to me, and they wanted to build a horse ranch. And they knew I loved horses and knew something about driving tractors and doing work, so they offered me a job, an hourly job, and so we went over there, and me and 3 high school kids, and we built them a house. We built them a barn and a stable and pens and all kinds of things. And this couple were very highly educated, very highly well-read, and they thought they knew a lot of stuff about how we ought to be doing this, when in fact they had no practical skills whatsoever, none. And to give you an example, we were building them a house, and so we'd say, we're about out of number 8 nails for putting this house together, right? So he would get in his truck and he'd drive about 5 miles down to the hardware store, and he'd bring us back a box of nails about this big. It's like, what's wrong with buying us a keg of nails so that we don't have... but that's just the way they did things. And it was very, while it was interesting, it was also very frustrating trying to make them happy and trying to keep them satisfied and trying to do the right kinds of things and be the right kind of an example. And I was really struggling with this lack of satisfaction, right? When I had a conversation with my church pastor, and he just kind of smiled and he said, "Well, you got the wrong attitude about this, Larry." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You think you have a job, and your job is to do the work for these people." He said, "The truth is, that couple is a king and queen in a kingdom, and you're a servant. You are there to learn servanthood." Well, maybe I don't want to learn. No. Well, seriously, wouldn't that? But I needed to learn servanthood so that when God gave me a church like this to love, I'd know how to do it. I'd know how to get out of the way. I'd learn how not to build myself up and need a lot of people to tell me what a great message that was. I needed to learn servanthood. So in that case, I understood, and the only thing I said, "Lord, make me a good student. Help me learn this quickly so we can move on to the next part." Right? And he did. He helped me with that understanding. So this desert experience was an opportunity for me to come closer to God and what he wanted. Right? And if I look at it in that way, I believe that as you mature in your Christian faith, you begin to understand that kind of a difference. All right? So the better we understand it, the better we can talk to God about it, and we can respond differently. If I'm there because of an exile, that's a bad choice that I made that got me into trouble, and I need to have a repentant attitude toward God and say, "Help me. I'm sorry. I screwed it. Larry got in the way again. Help me." If I'm there to learn something or to be an example, that's an entirely different kind of response on my part. Okay? But in neither case is it bad for me to be in the experience. Right? That's how God has changed me in that. Now, because of that kind of an attitude, I've talked about it briefly before. When Scott got hurt many years ago and spent all those days in the intensive care at the hospital in Denver, that very first night when I was talking to God, I said, "You know, I know somewhere in the Bible it says to pray continuously," and I said, for the first time in my life, I'm beginning to understand how close you can really come to that. And God, as clearly as I'm talking to you, said, "Larry, go look that up for me." It's like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning in the hospital. I'm in the work clothes. I went to work today. I didn't think to bring my Bible when I jumped in and tried to outrun the ambulance, Lord. He said, "Go find a Bible." So I did, and it's from 2 Thessalonians, or 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and it talks to me about rejoice always, pray continuously, and give thanks in all circumstances. And I said, you know, I'm beginning to understand the middle of that verse, but the ends of that seem a little tough. And God, as clearly as I'm talking to you, said, "Larry, do you trust me?" 3 times he asked me, just like Peter, "Larry, do you trust me?" He said, "I'm the great healer. You're worried about all these machines and all these dogs. I'm the one that's healing. Do you trust me?" "Yeah." "Okay, then I got some work for you to do while you're here in Denver." He said, "You go and be the kind of example I need you to be in this hospital, and I'll take care of Scott for you." Will that work? Well, of course it'll work, right? So those kinds of desert experiences cause us to want to react in a different way if in fact, we are truly mature in our Christian faith, and we begin to understand that. Now, another verse that I want to share with you about this idea of becoming the difference between being a Christian and being a disciple from Revelation chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. Okay? Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. So be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he will be with me. Okay? Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. I've needed that once in a while, right? I think we all do. So be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Okay? This verse, chapter 3 of Revelation, this section is when God was talking about the church at Laodicea. You know what I mean. I'm all tongue-tied here. Okay, and he started the section talking about this church, that they were neither hot nor cold. All right? Said if they were one or the other, he'd spit them out. But they were neither one. Okay? He was ready to spit them out because they thought they were self-sufficient. Right? They had money, they had this, they had everything. They were doing okay all by themselves. They just were kind of floating along. How many of us would that apply to? Right? How many of us feel like we're self-sufficient? I got a good job. I got a warm house. I get food every day. You know, we're a lot better off than she is, right? We don't even have to drive on the kind of roads that she was talking to us about this morning, all right? There's only 1 mile of dirt going to my house, right? Not 70 or whatever. So this idea of being self-sufficient is something we kind of need to watch that, all right? Now, because God was ready to spit him out, what he was really talking about is he was going to prune them as if they were a vine not producing fruit. So, prune them. Modern Western Christians often fall into this kind of a category. We're satisfied with where we are, okay? And what the section in chapter 3 of Revelation was talking about, it's time to repent. Time to say, wait a minute, I've made a mistake, I've got off on the wrong idea, and I need to get back to where I belong. That was the whole intent of writing that to them. So we need to think about that as ourselves. One of the reasons we don't try to be with Christ, be with Jesus, become his disciple, is because we think we're self-sufficient. We think we're okay. We think we got everything we need. So the solution that Jesus talked to us about in John chapter 15, abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit itself unless it abides in the vine. Neither can you unless you abide in me. All right? So this idea abiding in Jesus says that I'm regularly going to go there and say, okay, you put me in this teaching situation, whether that's this morning when I got out of bed or years ago in that hospital in Denver, I'm still being taught, right? So what is it I'm supposed to do? How is it I'm supposed to respond? Who is it I'm supposed to talk to? And I'm constantly talking to him about, okay, what do you got in mind here? All right? Now, this idea of abiding, okay, Webster says it means to remain, to stay, to dwell, and the one I like the best, make your home in. Make your home in. Where's your spiritual home? Right? Because we need to understand where we are. And this idea about abiding in him and from 1 Thessalonians 5, where it says, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances. It doesn't mean I got to walk around all day long praying, but it does say I need to walk around all day long with a recognition God is there before me. Something's going on around me, and I need to be paying attention to that. Okay? So abiding in God is not a technique by which we control our relationship with God, but it's a skill that we learn and develop. A skill. Right? Now, he offers that, but the only way we can learn the skill is practice. All right? If we look at Scripture over and over in the New Testament, we hear about Jesus going away by himself to a quiet place. You have a quiet place? Some place that you can go and just be alone with God. How often do you go there? How long do you stay when you get there? Right? I can have a quiet place about anywhere. All right? But what I really like, and this is going to sound terrible, Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock is one of my quiet places. You know why? Sue just went to work. I got the whole house to myself, right? I love her dearly, but Sue tends to think out loud. And sometimes those thoughts involve me, and oftentimes they don't, okay? And at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I got the quiet place. Boy, I love it. You know, I love her too, I really do. But you all get the point, right? You need to find that quiet place. You need to find when you can be alone and pay attention to God. And so this idea, it takes skills to master. So what I'd like for you to think about, and as we're beginning to get close to the end here, if we truly want to be a disciple, if we truly want to be an apprentice to God, we need to make a habit of seeking God in our life. Make a habit of it, all right? We talked about it a little earlier. I talked about it a little earlier. It takes some effort on our part to be this. Now, habits are an ever-present part of our daily lives. We all have habits that we get into, okay? For example, my habit is when I get out of bed, the first thing I want to do is make a pot of coffee, all right, after a quick trip to the bathroom, by the way. But then I want to make a pot of coffee and I want to take some to Sue because I know how much Sue loves coffee. So the first cup of coffee out of every pot that I make early in the morning goes to Sue because I love her and I want her to know that. All right? That's a habit. I don't even have to think about it, right? I just go do it. I know where the pot is. I know where the water is. I know where the filters are. It just happens. So that is a habit. So if I want to make seeking Jesus, seeking God as a habit, while I'm waiting 3 minutes for that Bunn coffee maker to make a pot of coffee, how about if I start thinking about God and what he's got in mind for me today? That'd be a great time to do that, right? Because all I'm doing is standing there waiting anyway. So I'm going to make it a conscious effort. As that coffee's dripping, I'm going to think about God. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to say a prayer. I might, okay? But I'm going to focus on God and just let God know, hey, I'm here. Okay? I appreciate the view out the window as that coffee's brewing. I appreciate seeing the bunny or watching the corn or hearing the birds, and I'm just going to be open to a relationship with God, right? I'm going to begin to make that a habit. Now, Webster says that a habit is a settled tendency or usual manner of behavior. It's also an acquired mode of behavior that has become nearly or completely involuntary. It means I don't have to think about it anymore. It's just going to be that way, right? And so seeking God on a regular basis needs to be a habit. And I couldn't help but think about some years ago, in what I now refer to as my past life, I was a supervisor in a factory with a bunch of machinists, and we were machining some big, heavy parts that were kind of complicated, and we needed to use lift assists and so forth. But my group knew safety was important to me. I did not want them to be hurt on the job. And I made it very clear that is totally unacceptable behavior. Because if you have an incident that requires you to get medical attention, you're going to need 2 trips, because when you get back, I'm going to tune you up. Right? They knew that. Now, so what I tried to do, and as far as I know, nobody else figured this out in the factory, but I got the crew together and I said, okay, look, we got new machines, a new line, we're all figuring this stuff out. If one of us gets hurt on this crew, what's likely to happen? How are we going to hurt ourselves if we're not careful, if we're not attentive? And so we started talking about it, right? And we made a list of things where it would be relatively easy for us to make a mistake and smash a finger or get a cut or whatever, right? So we get this list, and then I said, okay, out of this list, what are 3 things that are most likely to happen out of the list? So we talked it over and we picked 3 things, right? So then I gave every one of the guys on the crew a recipe card, and I told them, I said, from now on, minor new work rule. Once in the morning and once in the afternoon, I want you to take this card and walk up and down the line, and I want you to see the rest of the guys in the crew doing their job. And I want you to look and see if they're doing one of these 3 things. And if they are, I want you to go remind them they're not supposed to be doing it that way, right? You have permission to help each other start making a new habit not to do these 3 things. And I want you to sign it in the morning, and I want you to do it again in the afternoon, and I want every guy on the crew doing this. So in theory, at least, we had guys walking up and down the line all day long, taking care of each other, watching out for each other. And so what we would do, if we could go 30 days and nobody broke that rule, everybody was doing it right, we no longer had an issue with that way of getting hurt, we took that one off the list and pulled up another one. Because in 30 days, it had just become so much of a habit that you don't have to think about whether to do it or not. Does it make sense? 30 days is all it took. And it worked so well, we ultimately got a new safety guy, had the whole plant safety. So he decides if you had a crew that went all month long and didn't have a reportable OSHA incident, he would buy you pizza, all right? It got to the point that my crew was so far ahead of the rest of the plant, we had more consecutive months in a row of no OSHA incident than the second and the third place crews put together, right? He bought us steaks. All right? So my point is, you can change your behavior. You can create habits that you didn't have before. So what I'm going to challenge you with, okay, is this idea of making abiding in God a habit. Okay? Make it a habit. Stay consciously, or start by consciously picking a time to think about God. Now, think about it. It can be when you wake up. It can be over that first cup of coffee in the morning. It can be when you start your car. Think about it. Starting my car is pure habit, right? I know my keys are in this pocket. As I'm walking over there, I get the keys because that's the side, and I got the seatbelt on and the thing in reverse before I have to think about a thing on that car, right? It's just a habit. So maybe after I click the seatbelt, I can say, okay, Lord, I'm leaving now. Would you like to come with me? Right? I can make that a habit if I want to, right? Many of us make a habit of praying to God when we eat. Invite Him into that time. Okay? Just instead of just starting off some rote prayer about thank you for the food and whatever, think about God. What have you done for Him today? Or what's He done for you today? Okay? And just clear your mind and think about that. Think about that. Another habit that's real easy that I don't have to think about is turning on the TV when I get downstairs, right? I know how to do that, and I even know what channel I want, right? What about before I punched that button on the remote, I said, Lord, thanks for this comfortable chair and this cool basement. What do you got in mind for me this evening, right? Or this afternoon, or whenever it. But we could make that a habit that we're going to go to Him. We could do the same thing before we go to bed, right? We all got a routine that gets us ready to go lay down. And so what if I include God in that routine? Just being quiet and listening, all right? Another one that I like, and I do, but is when you realize that you've got a blessing from God. I've talked to you guys before about when I'm driving down the road and see a pheasant or a deer or just some kind of wildlife or whatever, or I'm outside and I hear the geese going flying over. That's a blessing God gave just to me. Nobody else around to share that with, just me. So when I recognize that, what a great opportunity to tell God, gee, thanks. Thanks for getting my attention. Thanks for telling me I matter. What do you got in mind? How can I be with you today? Okay? Now, if you're going to make this idea of seeking God a habit, and I hope you do, okay? I hope you're at least challenged to pick one. Don't forget it takes practice, right? It takes practice. So don't quit before next Sunday because you forgot on Tuesday or Wednesday, right? Keep after it. When I was explaining to you that if we could go 30 days without making one of these safety mistakes, that would take 2 or 3 months to get 30 days in a row, right? Didn't mean we gave it up. It just meant we kept trying. We kept practicing. Same way. So if you're going to make seeking God a practice, a habit, don't give up. Don't give up. And so in that, I'm going to leave you with one last quote from John Mark Comer. John is the one that wrote a book that is influencing me heavily in this series called Practicing the Way. John says, show me a person's habits, and I will show you what they are truly passionate about, most dedicated to, and most willing to suffer for. And most in love with, okay? And I will show you who they will become. Make seeking God a habit. Let God know that's what you're in love with. That's what you're willing to suffer for. Those desert experiences that you're most dedicated to. Seeking God in your life is a way for us to be with Jesus. So next week, then, we'll talk some about being changed while we're there, right? Shall we pray?